Radiators. They're a large component, but not that big of a job to replace. My name's Cole from FCP Euro, and today we're going to show you how to replace the radiator on a 2019 Volkswagen Tiguan. Here we have the Nissan's radiator kit that we've assembled here at FCP Euro. Now this kit includes everything that we need, including the coolant, the radiator, and the seals for the radiator hoses that meet to this, so we don't have to do that job twice if we have a leak from that hose. Might as well replace the seals while we're there. Now this Nissan's radiator here is going to be an aftermarket radiator, but it's going to be OE quality. It's a very high quality radiator while saving you some money by doing the job a little bit cheaper. Now there's not going to be a set service interval from Volkswagen on when you need to replace this radiator. However, we start to see problems around 60,000 miles or more, but it really just depends on your driving conditions and the maintenance of your vehicle. If you haven't changed your coolant out for a while, it may accelerate the wear on this radiator. So when do I need to replace my radiator? Well, if you start to smell coolant from the engine bay, it's a good time to start looking at this area. When we start to smell that coolant, it's usually an indication of something leaking. And the radiator can leak on the end tanks here, it can leak on the crimp fitting, or it can leak actually from the end tank itself cracking. Now some other spots that we can look at to see if a radiator is failing is going to be at the connections right here on the coolant fittings. They like to crack and they start to drip coolant from these fittings. That's exactly why we include the O-rings as well, because we want to reseal this part of the radiator best as possible. Also, radiators can fail on the internal side of it. They can get clogged with rust, debris, bad coolant, and can cause this radiator not to cool as efficiently. Also, we can have the fins being clogged by external debris, which also makes this radiator not work as great. So if you're having cooling system issues, always inspect underneath the hood, find where your issues are, and it may be your radiator. This radiator replacement is pretty straightforward, so with that, let's get into the tools that we'll need for this DIY. Now this radiator can normally be replaced in the vehicle without taking the bumper off. However, if you have a hard time separating the radiator from the intercooler, you will have to pull back the intercooler a little bit, and to do that, you have to remove the bumper. So some of these tools will not be required if you don't have to separate the intercooler from the core support, but we're going to go over all the tools anyway. We have an arrangement of sockets here. We'll need a 17mm wheel socket, T30 bit, and a T25 bit. We'll need an arrangement of torque wrenches ranging anywhere from 10 Newton meters all the way up to 140 Newton meters. We have an arrangement of picks and 9-degree hooks. This long one is definitely nice to have. And we have a bunch of flathead screwdrivers to help us separate the intercooler and the radiator. We have a pair of hose clamp pliers, but normal pliers will work as well, along with some cutters. You will need to vacuum fill the cooling system, so we have a vacuum fill tool here that we'll link in the description below, along with a bucket to mix that coolant, and we have a coolant drain pan to capture everything that we drain out. Some optional tools include wheel hangers if you have to remove the bumper, and power tools. And it's also nice to have a magnet because we can drop things in very small areas. Now that we've gone over all these tools, let's get into this DIY. Our first steps here is to open the hood and ensure the vehicle is nice and cold. We can touch the coolant bottle and make sure that the coolant is cold because we don't want to work on a hot cooling system. So after we have a cold vehicle here, we need to remove the cap on the coolant bottle. So we'll just unscrew that and set it to the side. After that, we'll get underneath the vehicle, take off the underbelly pan, and start draining the coolant. With your vehicle safely lifted up in the air, we'll take a T25 bit and remove these 8 screws holding this belly pan on. Once all those screws are out, there's going to be 2 locking tabs on this belly pan underneath that we just need to use a flathead screwdriver to pry up so we can slide this belly pan out. Underneath on the passenger side, we are going to locate our lower radiator hose, pull the electrical connector off of the temp sensor, and then we can pull this hose off by removing the clip and prying it off. A long 9-degree pick is going to be handy taking this clip off. Be sure not to lose this because we're going to reuse it later. Next, we can take a drain pan of sort to catch our coolant, and then we're going to remove this lower hose. We'll just wiggle it off very gently. We don't want to break that plastic coolant fitting, and then we'll drain the coolant this way. Good tip is just to rock it side by side. We'll let all this coolant drain out, and then we'll be right back. Next, we can come over on the driver's side and disconnect the electrical connector for the fans. There's going to be a locking tab on this, so we'll push that out and then depress and pull that off. Sometimes they can be a little bit stubborn, so we can take a pick, get underneath of the locking tab to help us aid get this off. And we'll just set this to the side. Back up top in the engine bay, we're going to start removing this intake here. So we'll disconnect this electrical connector here by pushing up on the lock tab and then pulling it off. We can set that to the side. Then taking a pair of pliers or hose clamp pliers, we'll remove this clamp, slide it up on the intake, and disconnect it from the air box. Now we can come over to the secondary air hose, pinch the connection, and then slide it off. To remove this vacuum line here, we'll take a 90-degree pick, get underneath the rubber hose, loosen it up a little bit, and slide it off. We'll just set that over to the side as well. We can now remove the air box here. It's just held on by some rubber grommets, so we'll come over to the back of it, pull it upwards a little bit, feel it pop off there, and then come around the side, do the same. Oh, this one hasn't been out for a while, so it's definitely giving us a little bit hard of a time. There we go. Whew. Don't be afraid to pull this off, and then we'll just slide it out of the way. Up front here, we'll pop this coolant hose out of the holder. It just slides right out, and then we'll set that backwards. With the T25 bit, we'll remove the 2 screws holding this air duct in. And then to remove this, we're going to have to lift up on these tabs here, and then we can just slide it out. Now on the driver's side, we're going to take a pick, get underneath of that clip for the upper radiator hose, remove it, and then pull the upper radiator hose off. Again, these can be a little bit tricky sometimes. Rocking it back and forth definitely helps taking these off. There we go. Be careful not to pry too hard on this plastic piece. We don't want to crack it. We're going to start removing the radiator fans now, and to do that, we'll take a flathead screwdriver, get right here on the radiator, depress the tab, and then slide the fans up. There's going to be a clip on both sides, so we'll just depress that, slide it upwards, and then repeat the process on the passenger side. Now with the radiator fans out of those tabs, we can just lift it up and pull it out of the engine bay. Be careful of the AC lines here when you remove this. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. You're going to want to grab a small 90-degree pick to release these tabs that hold the radiator to the intercooler. And the way that you want to do that is take the pick, position it down like this, get underneath of this section, and create a gap between the intercooler and this tab here. We're showing you here on this new radiator because it's a little bit tricky to see in the car. So we're gonna go do that now. So we'll just take the pick just like this, slide it in there, and then give it a twist. Make sure not to break the upper mounting tab for the intercooler. And then once we get in between there and depress that a little bit, we'll be able to slide this forward. Just like that. Repeat that process on the other side. Now, if you're still having problems releasing those clips, we're going to show you how to remove this grill here and access it from the other side. Taking a T25 bit, we'll remove these 4 screws up top here. Now this grill is going to slide forward out of the bumper here. So we'll just slide underneath here and start to pull this grill forward. Sometimes it can come out with the bumper, so we're just gonna have to separate this here. Once it's popped out of the clips, there's an electrical connector on the back of the emblem here if you have adaptive cruise control that we're gonna have to disconnect. We can take a flathead screwdriver here, depress this tab on the shroud, and then slide it forward. We can push this out of the way in the middle. Now we can access the other side of the clip here through this access hole. We'll just press down to get this out, and we're just using a pick to get it through on the other side. Now, if you're still having a hard time getting that radiator out of the intercooler, you're going to have to pull the bumper and slide the intercooler backwards so it can gain more access up top. So let's lift the vehicle up and take off the front wheels to show you how to do that. Now, to pull these covers off, you can use the tool that's included in your trunk or a 90-degree pick. Now, using a 17mm socket, we'll remove all these 5 lug bolts and pull the wheel off. If you don't have an impact like this, you're going to want to break the lug bolts free down on the ground first. We're going to have to pull the fender liner out here, so there's going to be 10 T25 screws up top here. Underneath, there's going to be 3 more T25 screws in the front and then a couple more in the back. Now we can pull this fender liner out. Now we have to pop this trim off here and pull it out a little bit to gain access to all the other hardware underneath. So to do that, we'll just pinch the tabs and slide it forward. Then when we get to this part, we need to just pull outward slightly. All right, that should give us enough room here. There'll be 1 T25 screw facing upwards here. And then we're going to have to pull the side marker bulb out of this side marker here. And then there's going to be a clip holding onto the bumper that we'll take off. Now go over to the driver's side and repeat that same process for the fender liner. With the fender liner off, we're going to repeat all the same processes that we did on the passenger side. Underneath, there's 4 more T25 screws that we'll remove, and then we'll meet you back up top. In the middle here, we're going to have to pull the bumper from this bracket here. You can use a flathead screwdriver to depress all the tabs, and we're going to work our way all the way down to pull this off. Sometimes those tabs are easier than others. Now we can come over to the sides here and tape off the painted area just for a little bit of protection and pull it off the vehicle and then slide the bumper off. Blue painter tape works great in this scenario just to give us a little bit more protection on the painted surfaces. Then once we have it taped, we can just gently pull this out of the body. Repeat that process on the other side. Once we have both sides released, we can come to the center of the bumper and pull it off. Next, we'll take a T30 bit and remove these 3 bolts. Now, take a flathead screwdriver, insert it into this little hole here, depress that tab, and then slide that plastic piece forward. Repeat that process on the other side. We'll now remove this plastic piece. Now, with everything exposed here, we can see the 2 mounts for the intercooler that holds it to the core support. Now, we're going to use a pair of cutters here and snip off these tabs to be able to release those mounts and then slide that whole assembly back. With all those tabs cut off, we can now slide this backwards. Now, with the intercooler detached here from the core support, we can tilt this back a little more to get access to that clip. Now, our clip is fighting us a little bit because it's a really tight fit into the intercooler. So to avoid damaging the intercooler, we're going to just cut that tab off of the radiator because we're going to replace the radiator anyways. So we'll just use a pair of diagonal cuts here and cut off this part of the tab. All right. With all the clips now released, we can separate this from the intercooler, lift up, and pull it out of the vehicle. Be careful of the AC lines here. You might have to push them a little bit to the side to get it out. Now, since we did cut off the clips on those intercooler mounts, we do need to replace them. So we're just going to do that now while we have the radiator out of the way. So tilt the intercooler back a little bit, and then sometimes you need a flathead screwdriver to pry them off, but we'll just slide those brackets off and then replace them. And we'll link those parts in the description below. We'll just slide that out, and then we'll slide our new unit on and in. Now, these are directional, so make sure that the big arrow is facing upwards. Now repeat that process on the other side. Now that we have our new mounts on the intercooler, we can push it forward and clip it in. Make sure you hear that nice click and it's not going to come out. Since we have a little bit more room here, we're going to replace the seals on these coolant hoses. And to do that, we'll take a 90-degree pick, grab the hose, get underneath the O-ring in there, and then remove it and replace it with a new one. Once we have that O-ring in there, we want to make sure it's sitting nice and even. We'll just run our finger around it, and then we'll just take some residual coolant and rub it all over that O-ring. We'll repeat that process on the lower radiator hose. At this point, we can also reinstall the clips if you remove them. Now we need to transfer over the seal here to our new Nissan's radiator. And to do that, we're gonna grab a flathead screwdriver, get slightly underneath of it and pry it off. Be very careful here. We wanna pry it towards the outside and then we'll slide it over the new one. Now we can install this onto our new radiator with that flap facing towards the front of the vehicle. Taking our new Nissan's radiator here, we're going to slide it down here into the engine bay. We want to be careful not to damage any of the fins on the radiator or the intercooler, so just go very slow when lowering this down. There's going to be 2 tabs that we have to line up on the bottom of the intercooler to slide the radiator in, and then we can push the top in. Once we have it slid down, we're just going to verify that the radiator is in the mounting tabs on the intercooler, and then we can push it into the intercooler and clip it in. Once we have it clipped in here, we want to make sure it's not going to come out. So we'll just pull backwards a little bit and wiggle it around and make sure we have a positive engagement here. We can now grab our fan assembly here and lower it down into the engine bay. Be careful of those AC lines. It's a little bit tight, and be sure not to damage the radiator fins. And then we'll slide this into the new radiator and clip it down. Once you have the fans roughly in position, we want to verify that the mounting tabs are in the brackets here. We're going to do that on both sides, and then we'll push down and clip it in. Once we have this pushed down, we want to make sure we hear that click, and then that this tab is over the fan assembly. Coming over on this side, we'll take this cap off of the radiator and then clip on our upper coolant hose. Once we have that clipped on, we're just going to wiggle this and make sure it's not going to come off. Coming down to this lower coolant hose, we'll take that cap off and install the hose. Since we're already here, we can reconnect this electrical connector on the temperature sensor. Since our vehicle is apart here and we don't want to take it apart again, we're going to vacuum fill the cooling system and inspect for any leaks. Taking our Zurich HT12 coolant, we're going to have to mix this because it's a concentrate. We're going to be doing a 50-50 mix, and that's going to be 50% of this concentrate to 50% of distilled water. So we're just going to pour this into our bucket here and then fill it with water as well. Now with our vacuum fill tool, we're going to insert one end here into the bucket and then put the cone in the coolant bottle. This tool is a great one that we offer on our website, and we'll link it in the description below. We'll connect our air line here. Then we'll make sure our suction hose is fully submerged in our bucket of coolant here, and then we're going to purge the air out of this line and then pull vacuum on the system. All right, we have a vacuum pulled on our cooling system here, and now we're just going to inspect the gauge on this fill tool to make sure that we don't lose vacuum in our system, and that can indicate that we may have a leak somewhere. In that case, we're gonna have to do some investigation and find out where that leak is. Once we've waited a little bit and inspected our gauge here, we see that our vacuum is holding strong, so we're gonna turn this lever and fill the system with coolant. Make sure you have this suction hose deep in the bottom of this bucket. All right, all the vacuum has left the system, so now we can remove our tool here, check our level, top off if necessary, and then we can reinstall our coolant cap. Now, if your coolant level is above the max line, that's totally okay, because we want a little bit more coolant in our system in case there's any air pockets that bleed out. After a visual inspection here of the cooling system, we don't see any coolant leaks here, so we're going to continue with assembling this vehicle. At this point, we're going to start to reassemble the front of the bumper because we had to tilt back the intercooler to remove our radiator. If you didn't have to do that step, you can skip forward to the part where we start reinstalling the intake. We can take these guides here, slide them back into place, and then clip them back into core support on both sides. Then taking this bracket here, we'll slide it down. You might have to go underneath this wire on the driver's side. And then we'll clip it back into the core support and grab the 3 bolts to thread them back in. Using a T30 bit, we'll thread these bolts in and then tighten them down to 10 Newton meters. We'll make sure that this wiring harness is on top here and then grab our bumper to slide it back on. We'll start here in the middle, slide it down into place. Make sure that wiring harness is above here. Slide it forward, and then I'll work our way to the sides where we'll clip those in as well. All right, once we have our sides roughly into place here, we'll push forward and get into place. Make sure that all the clips in the front here are clipped in. And then coming over to the side here, we're just gonna make sure our blue tape does not get stuck behind that headlight, and then we'll push it into place. Repeat that process on the other side. You may have to give it a little tap there to get it to seat nicely. We can now remove this blue tape. We'll now take our grill here, and if you do have active distance cruise control, you need to plug it in. And then we can slide this grill into these grooves here and push it forward. Make sure this is sitting nice and flush. Next, we'll take the 4 T25 screws and reinstall them up top here. You don't want to go crazy tight with this because they are going into plastic. Now, before we keep going with reassembling the bumper here, if you have a lot of debris behind the fender liners, this is a good time to clean it out. With our T25 bit and screw, we'll come over to the side of the bumper here, thread the screw through this hole, and then reinstall that screw right here. Be sure that the gap here on the bumper is flush. After that, we can clip this fender trim molding back in and then reconnect our side marker light. We'll reinstall our fender liner here and then reinstall the 10 screws in the wheel well. Continuing with installing the hardware on the fender liners, we'll come underneath here and install the 3 T25 screws underneath. And then at the back, there's 2 more T25 screws. Now repeat that process on the other side. Underneath, we can reinstall these 4 T25 screws. We can now reinstall our wheels here, install the 5 lug bolts, and then tighten them down to 140 Newton meters on the ground in a star pattern. Resuming back up top here, we can now grab this air duct, slide it back into place, and reinstall the 2 T25 screws. We'll take this coolant hose, clip it back into the holder here, and then grab our intake. We'll slide our intake down here into the engine bay, make sure that we line the front duct up first, and then we'll position it backwards. With everything aligned here, we'll push down on the rubber grommets to secure the intake. Then we'll come to the front here, reconnect this vacuum line to the intake, and reconnect the secondary air hose. Make sure you hear that click. Coming to the back of the intake here, we'll reassemble the pipe here. Just slides right on, and then position this clamp back over. Now we'll grab this electrical connector, clip it back on, and push down the lock. Let's go raise the vehicle to finish by putting on the underbelly pan. Back underneath, we'll reconnect our fan here, push that connector on, and then push the lock down, and then make sure any coolant hose brackets are properly clipped in. And it looks like this one came undone, so we're just going to clip it back on. Lastly, we'll take our belly pan here, slide it back into place, and then reinstall the 8 T25 screws. With everything now assembled, we could wash down the engine bay and get rid of any coolant residue and run the engine until it comes up to operating temperature and ensure that our radiator fans are actuating. After that, you want to take a vehicle for a test drive and make sure your vehicle is not overheating. Then you can let the vehicle cool down and top off the coolant reservoir after the vehicle is fully cool. And with that, we just replaced the radiator on a 2019 Volkswagen Tiguan. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, drop them in that comment section below. And if you want to see more MQB Tiguan content, hit that subscribe button because we have a lot more content coming. My name's Cole from FC Bureau. Thanks for watching and keep on wrenching.